Shalom, welcome to Judaism Today, a television series produced under the auspices of the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. I'm Jack Weinshanker. With this series, we plan to bring you personalities who are involved in the conservative movement, who in their daily lives play leadership roles in the Jewish community, both in New Jersey and internationally. Our series is dedicated to the hope that understanding will promote goodwill. We believe that Judaism teaches us to work in behalf of promoting goodwill among all people, so we might hasten the fulfillment of our ancient messianic dream. Welcome to our program. Our guest is Rabbi Yaakov Rosenberg, the Vice Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And by way of introduction, I must also say that a few minutes ago I asked Rabbi Rosenberg, is there anything else that I could introduce you with? And he said, that's adequate. So I feel I would have to add something of my own. I would say that just so that you can understand how I feel about Rabbi Rosenberg, I would say that in addition to being the Vice Chancellor of the Seminary, he is also a beloved teacher and friend. I've had the privilege, the honor of learning from and with Rabbi Rosenberg on a number of occasions. And I felt that it would be very appropriate to have him on our Judaism Today series to discuss a wide range of subjects. This evening we will be somewhat departing from our regular format. We will not be concentrating on any particular subject, but we will be covering a number of different areas that are appropriate to Jewish community life. Also, another departure from our regular format, because of the kind of teacher Rabbi Rosenberg is, we will be having two parts to our program. This first program will be part one. This will be followed next month with our second program, which will be our second part, continuing in the same general format. Rabbi Rosenberg, welcome. Let's begin with perhaps one of the most pivotal elements in the Jewish practice, specifically the Sabbath. It has been said that the Sabbath, in a way, has perhaps sustained the Jewish people. What is so important about the Sabbath to Jewish traditional practice? Why is it important? What does it do for the Jewish person? What does it do for the Jewish community?
I think it's very important for our audience to understand, first of all, Jack, what a great contribution you're making via this program. It's not a matter of a mutual admiration society, but I think that it's important for the region, the United Synagogue region in New Jersey, to know that what you're doing is, in a sense, a very pioneering effort. To the best of my knowledge, perhaps one of the first or few in the country, and it is therefore for me a personal pleasure and privilege to have been invited to participate with you. Now, as to your specific question about what makes the Shabbat, the seventh day observance, so significant to Jews and to Judaism from our point of view. The Sabbath day is the first day that is mentioned in the Bible as having been hallowed and blessed by the Almighty. It is, from the Jewish point of view, time is very sacred. If I could have my way, I would try to eliminate an expression that we have in the English language. We speak of time weighing heavily on our hands, or, gee, I have some time to kill. That's, from a Jewish point of view, one doesn't kill time, because time is very sacred. Time is all that you and I have in this world, and it's limited time. It's not unlimited time. So that the Sabbath day represents roughly a 25 to 26 hour period in the week when the Jew is called upon to remove himself from the world of things and the world of doing and making to the world of thinking, to the world of meditating, to the world of studying, to the world of looking within as well as without, to the time when the Jew doesn't worry about what he is going to make, but what he is going to be and what he is going to become. And that is why I think you may have, in your opening statement, may have unconsciously had reference to Achad Ha'am, who said, more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept or preserved the Jew. It is this period of time at the end of the week that bridges time for the Jews. As a matter of fact, among our Hasidic brethren, they don't consider the Shabbat, the Sabbath, as the end of the week, but rather the middle of the week. Well, you might ask, how do you get the middle out of the seventh day? And they answer, well, on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you prepare for Shabbat. And on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, you bask in the spirit of the previous Shabbat, so that Shabbat comes to be the middle of the week and not really the end of the week. Therefore, the Sabbath has a holiness to it in terms of reminding the Jew that time is very sacred. One doesn't kill time, one has to hallow time.
In terms of the Sabbath being a spiritually important, I think it has some very obvious psychological importance in terms of what it does. The fact that it takes a person who, during the week, has to really intensively try to either make a living or whatever their profession is, really has to work at it, but that they will decide that there will be a time where they just will relieve themselves of that burden, aside from the religious aspects of it, but perhaps even the physiological or the medical aspects of it. Is this something that is also implied in the traditional meaning of the Sabbath?
There are two Hebrew words used with reference to the Sabbath. You have Shavat, which is the actual root for Shabbat itself, which implies a physical resting. As you said, for instance, it's, as you know, I'm sure most of our listening audience, viewing audience know, a daily morning service will begin somewhere 6:30, 7:30 early in the morning before everyone rushes off to work. But on a Shabbat morning, the service begins at 9, perhaps even as late as 9:30, because part of the Shabbat is to sleep later, to give the body that physical rest. One often speaks about the wonderful aspect of a Shabbat nap. Shabbat afternoon is the time for that kind of physical relaxation. And then there's another word, vayinafash, and that seems to ring, I'm sure, to the ears of many as having the word nefesh. That's the kind of tranquility or relaxation which speaks to the soul. And so the Shabbat is a day of physical relaxation and of spiritual recreation. Recreation in the sense of recreating, of looking to feed one's soul, not only one's body, looking to, perhaps in the vernacular, to recharge the battery on Shabbat to be able to make the new week. Because as you said, whether it was the agricultural life of biblical days, which is not an easy one, just as agricultural life today. Farmers today do not have an easy time of it. Or whether it be the technological era in which we live. We're all caught up in the economics of life and in the pursuit of a livelihood. And in our day, that means that mommy and daddy and the kids or young single adults are involved. One, between their doing their work, their job. Two, some degree of community involvement, so that weekday meals are haphazard meals, fast food meals,
right,
in so many instances. Shabbat is the time for the family to relax together, to have a good meal together, to fill each other in, as it were, on what's happened during the week. It's the time for husband and wife to be able to relax. No meetings to run to. No excessive telephone calls to make. Even the time when we may perhaps relax from radio and TV and concentrate just upon being together as a husband and wife, as a family unit, as an individual human being, able to spend that much more time, as it were, with the Almighty, in terms of studying His Word and expanding upon His Word as to how and what it can do for us in our own daily lives. So you're right, there is also the psychological aspect to Shabbat. As a matter of fact, I must tell you, my parents were immigrants, not American born. My parents never heard of marriage counseling. They knew nothing about any psychological texts for marriage. But I was raised from infancy up on a scene that I shall never forget, and one that my wife and I have replayed now for almost 37 years, that our children were raised in. A part of the Sabbath tradition is a mother would bless the Sabbath candles. That was before sundown. My father and I would go off to sunset services. We'd come back and there was a beautiful table set, and we would welcome the Sabbath angels, as it were, with a beautiful Shalom Aleichem. And then, still before the meal began, and before Kiddush, the prayer over the wine was recited, my father would look lovingly at my mother and serenade her with the famous chapter 31 of the book of Proverbs. Eshet chayil mi yimtza, a woman of valor who can find. Surrounded by her handiwork, literally, the food that she prepared, the table that she set. Today, perhaps a more cooperative venture, but one in which a husband takes the time to acknowledge the blessing that his helpmate is to him. Long before Havelock Ellis or the Right Reverend Dr. Sigmund Freud or marriage counseling bureaus offered us that kind of advice. Also, the time when parents didn't know about psychology of raising children, but every Sabbath Eve, part of the tradition of the family was for the father, in many cases today a father and a mother, lovingly putting their hands upon the heads of a child, upon the head of a child, and invoking God's blessings. A separate blessing for a son, a separate blessing for a daughter. So that the psychology of thanking God for a mate, of thanking God for children, thanking God for the family unit.
Another very important aspect of Judaism is the observance of kashrut. How does that fit into the lifestyle of the Jew, and why is that so important to Jewish existence?
All the references to the dietary laws, which we call the laws of keeping kosher, or the laws in Hebrew of kashrut, the dietary laws are mentioned in, of course, in the book of Leviticus. And wherever they're mentioned, they are always identified with, before, during, or after, by the term kiddoshim, or kadosh. You shall do this because you ought to be holy. This is perhaps the ultimate goal. From the point of view of Judaism, a person, a human being, is to strive to achieve holiness in his life. And I would define holiness as a hypersensitivity to an awareness that there's God in every aspect of our life, and that each human being is created in the image of God, meaning a spark of the divine. And our task is to always sensitize all of the drives in a human being to make sure that they are used for holy purposes. So whether it's the drive to eat, or the drive to succeed, or the drive for sex, these are not to be permitted to go helter-skelter, as it were, but ought to be directed in such a way that they bring holiness, they bring a sense of sanctity to the individual and to the atmosphere around, so that we take the element of food. We eat and all other animals eat. What's the difference? When we eat, we're conscious. We ought to be conscious of the fact that we're eating food that we didn't make. We, somewhere towards the end of the process, we may have gotten involved in terms of the cooking or the baking. But even the farmer who works so hard is perhaps most aware that without God and the laws of nature, the sunshine and the rains and the chemicals in the ground, the seed would never produce the wheat, the fruit, the wherewithal which enables us to have the food which we ultimately eat. And that's why in Judaism, for so many different things that we eat, there's a blessing that says, in effect, I'm not giving you the literal translation, but the meaning which says, I acknowledge you, God, as being the master of the universe, who made all of this possible, who created a world in which there can be seeds planted in the ground, which can be nurtured in such a way that they can produce the raw materials which bakers and manufacturers and cooks can then put together into a luscious meal, but a meal that is to give us the strength to continue to do God's work in this world.
I noticed that you didn't specifically include anything about the sanitary aspects of kashrut, of the kosher food.
I must honestly tell you that certainly within biblical sources and most rabbinic sources, I don't think there are any references to health. I think it would be a hard thing to try to prove that dietary observing Jews are physically, hygienically stronger, healthier than those who don't observe.
Okay, so
now we know by conjecture, we know that certain foods in terms of the ancient Near East being hot and desert, our people having been nomadic, obviously logically certain foods, but we can take care of that today with refrigeration and with modern health means, and yet we Jews still stick to dietary laws, not because of the physical health aspect, but because of the spiritual health. One of the ways of controlling a fundamental appetite, meaning a fundamental drive within the human being, the drive for food, but that we are not to become gluttons. We have to learn to control that and to dedicate that drive to a sense of holiness.
The next item I'd like to, next significant element in Judaism is the concept of Zionism. Modern Zionism is one aspect of it. Zionism, the concept, the principle of Zionism really obviously goes back much longer than that. What role does Zionism play in the Jewish religious tradition? And if you would you also address, give us some insight as to what the conservative movement's position has been on Zionism ever since the conservative movement has...
Well, I think it's important for all of us to realize, if we talk of Zionism as a political movement, that goes to the days of Theodor Herzl, the first World Zionist Congress in 1897. If we talk of it in cultural linguistic terms, nationalistic terms of culture and language, then we go to the period from roughly 1860 on, where we can speak of Haskalah, of a revival of the Hebrew language in terms of making Hebrew a living language of poetry and literature and drama, etc. But the fact is that we talk of Zionism as an ideal of Jews being their own masters of their own fate in their own land. Then we go back to the original promise made to Father Abraham and to Mother Sarah when they heard God's command, Lech Lecha, get thee out of thy land, leave the Ur of Chaldees, leave your father and mother's birthplace, your birthplace, a family homestead, and go to the land that I will show you. And that's the promised land, the land which you and your children and your grandchildren and their children thereafter will be given as the land in which you will attempt to develop the ideal life. That is why David Ben-Gurion of blessed memory, the founding father of the modern state of Israel, was always wont to refer to the quotation in the book of Isaiah to remind us that even the modern state of Israel, which was established on May the 14th, 1948, was not to be regarded as an end in and of itself, but rather the purpose of that state was to make of it and the Jewish people le'or goyim, a light unto the nations of the world. Let all the peoples of the world learn how to live. And that is why one of the great sources of pride the past 36 years, almost 37 now, since the State of Israel was established, is to see that there are some 350,000, 400,000 Arabs, most of them Muslims, many of them Christians, all of them non-Jews, who are full-fledged citizens of the State of Israel and have their elected representatives in the Knesset and the Parliament of Israel to attempt to show what a Jewish state, a Jewish government, how it conducts its affairs to include a pluralistic society. So that Zionism has come to mean more than just that political concept of Jewish independence. It's Jewish independence in its own state to develop a full-blown Jewish life in all of its ramifications in order, not as an end in itself, but in order to serve as an example, as a light to the rest of the nations of the world as to how one ought to conduct a political, economic, social, religious country, even in the 20th century into the 21st and 31st centuries.
Is there anything that we can say about the history of the conservative movements attitude towards Zionism?
I'm glad you asked that. Of the three major movements in Judaism today, that is to say of orthodoxy, reform, and conservative, Reconstructionism is the youngest. Hasidic is normally part of orthodoxy. The Orthodox movement, by and large, overwhelmingly, was always opposed to Zionism. There was a mere handful, literally a handful, that joined with Theodor Herzl in 1897. They were primarily the founders of the religious Zionist movement called Mizrahi. But numerically, overwhelmingly, Orthodoxy was opposed to Zionism. Reform Judaism, from the very outset, totally opposed to political Zionism. Conservative Judaism is the only one of the three wings which from its very inception was Zionistic. As a matter of fact, the late Dr. Solomon Schechter, the second president of the seminary, in 1906 attended the World Zionist Congress, from which he issued a statement that Zionism was an integral part of his understanding of Judaism as we saw it from a conservative point of view. You could not be a good Jew, in quotes, without at the same time being a staunch Zionist.
Do you see the conservative movement growing in Israel? What do you see as the future of the
It's
conservative
very interesting. Today, hard to believe, we have over 40 conservative congregations, from full-time positions to embryonic communities. We have our rabbinical school that just opened its doors for Israeli students. In addition to our own student center, Neve Schechter in Jerusalem, where all of the seminary students are required to spend a year. Now our cantorial students as well as rabbinical students. I think it's quite clear, and our brothers and sisters in Israel are becoming increasingly aware that conservative Judaism represents an approach to Judaism in which Israel plays a dominant central role, as a result of which we just opened in September our own first kibbutz, first conservative kibbutz, American-born, reared, raised, trained young men and women, singles, even marrieds even with some children. I think there are now some 35 or 37 young people living in a kibbutz called Hanaton in the Galilee, and that have started the first conservative kibbutz. We have a new group that's going off this spring and summer to be added to the pioneers of Hanaton. So that it's quite clear from the personalities that have been involved from the conservative movement with the Zionist movement from the days of Herzl on, down to our own day with the whole Masorati movement, the movement for conservative Judaism called in Israel Masorati Judaism.
I read recently that they're beginning to have some students in Israel studying to be rabbis.
Yeah, I said that's what I referred to, our own rabbinical school for Israeli students to train to become rabbis and teachers and educators.
These are students who were born in Israel.
These are native Israeli sabras.
Now this is really a new thing for us.
That's right.
Very interesting.
And a very interesting, challenging, pioneering effort.
Do you feel that the conservative movement is something that's relevant to the Israeli?
Every time the chancellor of the seminary has gone and he goes usually at least twice a year. He has met with the important leaders of every segment of the community, of the population in Israel. And he has been especially welcomed most warmly by leaders, the intelligentsia leaders, not only of the Ashkenazi community, but of the Sephardic community, our Sephardic Oriental Jewish brethren, who welcome this kind of an approach to tradition, which is alive and vital and vibrant, and yet not and different from the Orthodox approach.
The clock has done us in. I think you can see now why we decided that we needed you for 2 parts.
Thank you.
So we thank you very much for this program, but we look forward to having you back again on our next program for part 2 of Rabbi Yaakov Rosenberg, beloved teacher and friend.
Thank you very much, Jack.
I think that you can see it's very fast. We would like to thank our guest for joining us for this program. We hope you will tune in for our next program in the series Judaism Today. Judaism Today is brought to you by the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. We welcome your comments and suggestions, and we invite you to write to us at the United Synagogue of America, 910 Salem Avenue, Hillside, New Jersey, 07205. That's the United Synagogue of America, 910 Salem Avenue, Hillside, New Jersey, 07205.